Good? Okay, excellent. All right. So welcome to the Creating an Outstanding Proposal workshop. Today, here's a kind of a brief overview of the agenda. We're going to briefly discuss the different components of the application. We're going to talk about what makes a competitive proposal. We're going to review a sample proposal that's an actual proposal that was submitted and awarded, an awarded NJCH grant. We have 2 breakout room activities, which will comprise a large portion of the presentation. And at the end, we'll discuss why proposals are not funded, sort of the primary reasons. Then we'll have some Q&A and some other assorted pieces of the presentation. Now, really the purpose of this workshop is to help you begin thinking about how to translate your idea into a full proposal. We recognize that we have varying degrees of experience, some experienced grant writers, this might be your first grant proposal that you have submitted. So we're really just trying to help people kind of think through the process of applying for a grant. One of the assumptions of this is that you have already reviewed our grant guidelines and application questions. If not, definitely would recommend you do that as soon as possible. I guess there might be some people in here who aren't applying in this current round, but definitely if you are applying, I definitely recommend reviewing the guidelines and the application as soon as possible. And really the goal of this, some of the information will be specific to NJCH grants in this workshop. However, our goal was to make this workshop broadly applicable and relevant to other funding opportunities. So we don't just want this to be specific, useful to NJCH, but useful to you as you apply for other funding opportunities. Okay, so first kind of piece, if you want to like a kind of more in-depth discussion of this material, I recommend going to the njhumanities.org /resources. Gigi will put that link in the chat. If you look under webinar materials and recordings, we had a workshop on February 24th that we recorded called Applying for an NJCH Grant. It covers this material right here in more details, but it sort of is a high-level overview of different components of our proposal. We have the project period, which is when you will be using the NJCH funds for your project. The narrative, which really talks about the who, what, when, where, and why. The budget, which is the funds requested and an explanation of those funds. The Humanities Scholar and Project Team, which is really the centers of expertise in your project. We have required attachments and supplemental materials you can provide with your application. So this workshop is really going to be focused on the narrative and budget portions of the application. We don't really have time to go into the other details. And like I said, if you want to learn more about those, read our guidelines. And if you want kind of more of an in-depth dive, watch the recording of the February 24th workshop. Now, what makes a competitive proposal? A lot of different aspects of it. But overall, these are kind of 5 things that we see a lot in proposals that are funding. One is it matches the funding priorities. So you're really looking at, I think it's always a kind of mistake to chase funding. So you're really looking at ways that our priorities and your priorities intersect. So how does what are your organization's priorities and goals? What are our goals? And we'll talk about that in the next slide. And how can we find an intersection of those goals? Follows the guidelines. As I said before, if you're applying in this round, definitely recommend reading the guidelines. Definitely had a few applications that have not been funded because they put ineligible expenses or other things in there. So definitely recommend reading that. A cleared project description, the what. This might seem obvious, but we find a lot of organizations that submit unsuccessful proposals. They focus a lot on the why they're doing this, but they don't really talk about what they want to do. So they provide a long justification for why they want to do this project. They don't really go into the details of the nitty gritty of what they're doing. And I think another sort of corollary to that is that a lot of times organizations will focus on the big picture they say, this is what we want to do, but they're thinking about a project in a sort of a 5-year time span. So we recognize that the grant, we fund project grants, not general operating support, but we recognize that the projects you're coming to us with might be part of a, 2-3 year initiative or longer. So really focus on what you want to do within the grant period. What do you want to accomplish with this grant funds within this grant period? Instead of really focusing on the sort of big picture, what you want to accomplish overall. A proposal that's competitive communicates value to the audience. Sort of why is this project well suited to serve the needs and interests of your audience or audiences, and also talks about the value to the organization, which is really, why are you doing this? Why is this important to the work? Why are you specifically well suited to accomplish this work? Now, these are our funding priorities, which are to build new audiences for the humanities, bring people of different perspectives and backgrounds together, explore new program models. And we say new, we mean new to you, not necessarily new overall. So, and it could be also an exploration of it in an incubation grant, saying, well, okay, we've been doing X for years, but what might be some new ways to sort of accomplish these same goals, and to create lively humanities opportunities around the state. The humanities can be very serious, but we also like, to find elements of fun as well within the humanities. And this goes back to this earlier question. Why are you doing this? And why are you doing this? So these are two really important questions to ask as you're going through this. Why does this particular project serve your organization, serve your audience? And why are you doing this? In a sense, it's kind of mirrors that question in some ways, but what particular value do you bring? Why does this serve your organization? We always sort of caution organizations from chasing funding. So it's really important that you can find an alignment between your goals as an organization and our goals as an organization whose purpose is to fund public humanities programming. Okay, so this is getting in a little bit into the details of what we'll be discussing in the breakout room. But we kind of have, and I think everyone should have received a worksheet prior to the webinar. Gigi will also put these materials in the chat. We sent a couple materials. We sent 2 sample proposals, 1 sample incubation grant proposal, 1 sample action grant proposal. We also sent a starting, a narrative worksheet and a budget worksheet. And really, we're going to be focusing on steps 1 and 2. And we really don't even have time to get through all of step 2. But really looking at how can you get from the sort of a germ of an idea to kind of a concrete description. And I said before, really when you're thinking of how to describe your project, thinking about how you're going to describe what you specifically want to accomplish with this grant, within this grant period, with this and this funds. You can talk about the bigger picture, and I think that's helpful to give context to the work that you're doing. But it's really important to mainly focus on the work that you specifically want to accomplish with this grant. So part is describing your project, moving from that description into kind of thinking about the component pieces. So for you to meet that goal or to accomplish what you describe, what are the kind of components or little kind of smaller pieces that you need to integrate together to create the larger whole? And then we'll talk about sort of beginning the process of outlining your budget, and then sort of going through the, and then we have some helps. We have some, in the worksheet, there's some tips to help you outline your narrative. They don't really correspond directly with the narrative questions on the application. They're really just sort of prompts to help get you started. So you don't even, if you have the worksheet, we recommend working through in this kind of process, starting from a high-level description, thinking about what you would need to accomplish those high-level goals, the kind of smaller pieces, then working on the budget, and using that budget as a scaffold to kind of create your narrative as well. And this is the humanities. I think many people we work with are more comfortable with words. They're kind of less comfortable with numbers and the budget, but it's often to their detriment. We've seen a lot of applicants really focus on their narrative and think of the budget as an afterthought, but ultimately this is a request for money. And so the reviewer committee is going to scrutinize your budget to see that it's clear, it's appropriate to the project, and then it matches your narrative. Are the costs that you're requesting reflected in the narrative itself? So I think this is a good point to stop for questions before we get into the next part, where we're going to discuss a proposal that was submitted and awarded, and then kind of move on from there. So Gigi, do we have any questions so far?
No questions at this moment. I just wanted to, in case you haven't noticed, folks, I put links to the sample narrative worksheet that was sent out. These same links were sent out to you ahead of this time, so you would have them in your Eventbrite registration information, or I'm sorry, your reminder email with the Zoom link. So there's the narrative worksheet, the budget worksheet, and one of the sample grant proposals. I'm going to send the second sample grant proposal as soon as I get back to typing in mere moments.
Okay, great. And the other thing I want to say is I recognize sometimes I have a tendency to talk a little fast. So if you ever want me to slow down, just type it in the chat and I will do so. So with that.
I'm sorry, James, there was one more question that I had missed. I was just reviewing really quickly. And that was, are these slides, no, it's fine. Are these slides going to be available afterward, where the recording of this, as well as materials for it, will all be available on the resources page of our website. Again, in that same spot that James directed you to earlier to look at our previous grant workshop, which is, so it's njhumanities.org/resources. And then there's a tab that's called webinars and
it's a button. It's the bottom left button. So you'll see like program materials, and then it's the bottom left. It says webinar materials and recording.
Webinar materials and recordings. Thank you. I knew the word webinar was in there and then I couldn't remember the rest of it. Apologies for that. But you should see it there, and that'll link you to a number of previous things that we have done.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so since there are no questions, I'm going to move on in the interest of time.
Make sure you open up these materials that I'm linking you to so that you have ongoing access to them throughout the workshop, excuse me.
Yeah, that's actually important. So I would, if any, particularly the narrative worksheet and the budget worksheet, because you will be using those during the breakout rooms. So definitely recommend downloading those if you haven't received them already. Okay, so I'm going to discuss a sample proposal. This is a 2021 incubation grant that was awarded in December from the Roebling Museum, called To Be Good Neighbors. And just to be clear, we did get permission from the Roebling Museum. So we request for both of the people that we got the sample applications from. I explicitly asked for permission to share it, and they said yes. So just so you're aware, we wouldn't share your materials without your permission. Okay, so this is the sort of this is an edited description. You'll see that I had to kind of edit it for length because it was just too much text. But this is a short description. The community urged us to preserve a house across the museum, an authentic example of 20th century industrial immigrant workforce housing within a company town. Now that we own it, how might we use this opportunity to create connection and growth in our community? So the first question I have for everybody is, what do you think this is? Do you think this is an incubation grant or an action grant? Now, incubation grants are focused on planning and research. Action grants are focused on implementation. So just based on the short description, what kind of grant do you think that is? Put your responses in the chat.
2 votes for incubation.
Yep.
Coming in fast, incubation.
Yep, that is correct. So this is an incubation grant. I added the description for length, but one of the essential questions the application addresses is to gauge whether this project is viable in the long run. As they put it, do we need another historic house museum, or would the residents of Roebling prefer a coffee shop? And that was kind of a pithy way of saying that, how can we serve the needs and interests of our community through this project, and how can we gauge that? And part of that process can be saying, okay, well, what we thought was the way to serve them might not essentially be what we thought to begin with. And so that can be a component of the incubation grant process. If you have questions about this, we can discuss this during the grant consultation, the sort of one-on-one grant consultation, whether you think your project is more appropriate for an incubation or an action grant. But broadly speaking, part of an incubation grant can sort of be asking that question, like, as Gigi and I say, failure is an option with an incubation grant. And what we mean by that is part of it can be determining whether something is viable. Maybe you go through a process of working with this community and saying, okay, actually what we thought, there's no interest in this. This doesn't work for our group. So we need to sort of recalibrate it, our goals and our expectations and our kind of ideas for this work. Now, I want to ask another question for the chat. What do you think some of the activities the organization would be looking to fund with this proposal? So if you have any ideas in the chat.
Focus groups, surveys, listening sessions, community survey, needs assessment, community assessment, impact assessment, a lot of assessment coming through.
Yes, that's all great. So kind of go to the next slide, which is I broke out some of the high level sort of pieces or components of this proposal. So if you look at the proposal, kind of the high level things that they're looking to accomplish is to research community engagement practices, primarily by discussing, reaching out to their peer institutions, other organizations that have done similar work and kind of seeing what their practices are. Taking that sort of research, developing their own sort of community engagement strategies to implement. And then they'll conduct the community outreach. And then once they've concluded that, so yes, that would definitely have an element of assessment in there between community outreach and synthesizing findings, is sort of assessing what they had sort of determined throughout the process. And then from that, they will create a plan, sort of an action plan. And sort of in the question itself is really, is this historic house museum a really viable way to serve our community? Okay, now here's a question. I'm gonna show you their budget next. What do you think I'm gonna ask the chat, what do you think the biggest expense in this grant is? If you could take a guess, what do you think the number one expense in this grant is?
Community outreach, outside consultant, staff, surveys and focus groups, researcher. You all nailed it.
Yes. So the biggest expense is personnel time. So as you see, this is a $15,000 request. They have a $16,100 match. Almost the entire request is personnel time, whether from the staff or from the consultants. One thing so you see how here is that how the executive director calculated their request and match is they said, okay, we think that this will take 30% of our time. This is obviously a priority project for them. So they're thinking, okay, this will be an estimate. We expect that I'm going to spend 30% of my time on this. And as Gigi said, personnel time, whether it's staff or outside people, is almost always the biggest expense on an NJCH grant. So you can request staff time within this. Now you see here, I just want to point out is that the match is in cash. So we can kind of, that's because it's coming from the salary of the executive director. So it's organization funds being able to support it. If there was a volunteer position, it would be under in kind. Okay, so that kind of
James,
goes over.
may I jump in there really quick, just about the cash
Absolutely,
match?
Gigi. Yes.
Really quickly, because there was a question about this as well. So cash match, James mentioned the difference between cash, which is a funding outside of New Jersey Council for the Humanities, but cash funding that is contributing to this grant project. And then in kind is the volunteer and donated time. We do not require you to tell us where you're getting your cash. If you tell us it's cash, we believe you, basically is what it comes down to. Most common sources of cash match are other grants, the organization's regular operating expenses, just, wherever you get your budget, however you get it together, and then sometimes individual donations as well. But we do not require you to elucidate where specifically it comes from. That's all.
Okay, great. So it is time for our first breakout room, which will be 15 minutes. So what we'll discuss in this portion is if you look at the worksheet that we had sent earlier, the narrative worksheet, really groups will focus on steps 1 and 2. So really thinking about, okay, writing the short description of your project, really what we can think of as the elevator pitch for your project. If you had to describe your project in 1 to 2 sentences, what is the essential information you would want to communicate to a potential funder? And then really going from there is thinking about the component pieces. For you to accomplish those goals, what are the kind of discrete pieces, components that you would need to accomplish that larger goal? So with that, Gigi, could you assign people to breakout rooms?
I can indeed. And I know there are some people who joined us more recently. I just put the links to the 2 worksheets, the narrative worksheet and the budget worksheet, into the chat again. So hopefully everybody has access to those. Again, those are the ones that specifically the narrative worksheet is where we're going to start in this breakout room. Is that correct, James?
Yeah, we're going to be focusing really on step 1, which is outlining the project components. So, don't fret. I know 15 minutes might not be enough time to get through everything. So, just everyone, just do your best. This isn't really, we're not really, trying to get through writing the whole proposal, but really just kind of helping people kind of begin the process of thinking through how to get from the sort of germ of the idea to sort of a full completed narrative that is hopefully funded.
Excellent. I'm about to send you off into your breakout rooms. So go ahead and get started as soon as you're all there. Have a great time.
I don't see my breakout.
Everybody out. Okay. Hi, Karen. Okay, we still got a few people here. Okay, Karen, you did not join your breakout room, and I think it does not assign me to one. Okay. Setting a timer. Hey, Joe. I think I might pop into a breakout room and see if people have questions for me. And then I will jump back out again. Oh, yes, we have been asked for help. I'll be back. Hey, everybody who's just joined us. We have some breakout rooms going on right now, but they're actually about to be over in just under about 2 minutes. So hang out for a minute. We'll get back together very shortly and continue.
Gigi, could you put me back in my breakout room? I don't know what happened.
No, the breakout rooms are ending. Everybody's coming
Oh,
back.
they ended. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Oh, all right. No problem. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, you should have got a message that said breakout rooms are closing. Sorry about that.
I'm sure it was up there. I just missed it. I'm sorry.
No big deal. Welcome back, everybody. Now we just have to wait for James to get back here. Okay. I think we've got our folks back. James is back.
I should probably unmute myself before I begin speaking.
I was just about to say, James, are you muted?
Yeah, yes, I am. All right, great. So does anyone, I'm curious, sort of before we move on to the next portion, are there any sort of questions that came up that you'd like to discuss, or sort of findings or insights that you had in your group? So I'm just really curious for people to, we have a little bit of time to share kind of what went on in the breakout room.
Just real quick, I would like to share that good job on whoever teamed people up, because I don't know if that was intentional, but there was a lot of relatedness in our group, and I think it'd be really good if we could figure out how to stay in touch with each other after this, because we'd like to coalesce.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you want, feel free to share your contact information amongst everyone. I mean, I think we sometimes I hesitate to sort of blanket share everyone's contact information because they might not want it to be sent. But that's something we can discuss for sure. So I don't know, Gigi, do you have any thoughts about that?
Agreed. And we are always happy to make introductions, but we do like you to request it rather than just for us to blanket give the information out. We will consider that for the future, however. Also, Beth, it was the gods who determined which rooms you were in. The gods of Zoom have determined that, so it was purely coincidental, but I'm thrilled that it was an excellent coincidence.
Yeah, absolutely. So Keith, Keith, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I did, guys. I'm going to second what Beth said. There were 4 of us in a group, and I was lucky enough to be one of the 2 that got through in the short time we had. But what an amazing exercise. My question for you is, and it was raised by someone in the group, or suggested by someone in the group. And the suggestion was that you guys are great about listening to some of this and in essence, offering feedback on concepts and proposals prior to authoring, or perhaps as part of forming up the project. Is that a mechanism you guys offer? And is it, do you allow us to tentatively lay the project out for you in a meeting or some structured way that can give us feedback on what your experience has shown, or where you think that it's troublesome?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So we do offer the ability for, we call them grant consultations. So sort of a one-on-one meeting with program staff, primarily me, because my main focus is on grants. Gigi primarily, I mean, she helps with grants, but is primarily focused on developing new programming and sort of administering those so the newer programming initiatives that we have. If you applied in this round, you should have received a link in the approval email to schedule a meeting. I know that some of you have, though, compared to I think I have at this point 8 consultations scheduled for almost 70 applicants. So definitely would recommend signing up soon. I don't know, Gigi, do you have that link available to you? If not, you know what, probably the best thing to do is just to follow up afterwards if you didn't receive the link. I sent if you applied in this round, if you submitted an LOI in this round, I've sent all the notifications as of Tuesday, the 16th at 9 p.m. So you should have it. I also sent a follow-up email on Wednesday yesterday, just sort of asking people to check their junk and spam emails because sometimes the notifications go through that. So definitely sort of that's a long way of saying, yes, we do offer the opportunity sort of one-on-one feedback in the grant consultations. There's a little bit of limited availability because, you know, we have a lot of applicants and, you know, a very small staff for sure. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. If you don't mind a quick follow-up, is there any, can I bring you is there any danger in bringing the grantor a half-completed story or plan?
Like to the consultation? Yeah, you don't need a full draft. I mean, some people don't even submit the draft.
I mean, like, what if you don't like it? I mean, I'm wondering to myself that the idea that we're thinking of heading in this way, bringing the uncertainties as well, or do you want it as close to final? Would you like to have the consultation reflect as close to final to the application itself?
No, it's not necessary. I mean, you see a lot of, I mean, we've experienced sort of a lot of different scenarios through it. You know, I will say that consultations have saved a few proposals that probably might have been rejected otherwise because just to sort of, there's something in it that was ineligible, or, you know, we've kind of helped them work through some other ideas. So we've definitely helped applicants kind of work through ideas. We have seen some drafty drafts, as we like to say, or even, you know, it might not even be a full draft yet, but just sort of an idea. And we, you know, part of that process is kind of helping you, you know, giving you the time to talk through it with staff and finding ways to help refine your ideas in a way that, like, you know, serves your organization as well. So again, talking about where can your goals as an organization intersect with our sort of funding priorities and our guidelines, if that makes sense.
More thing I would advise on this is we can have a grant consultation at any stage in the process. So what's going to work best for you is really the question. If it's better to talk with us early, then do that. If you need help formulating your ideas, do that. If you really feel like you know where you're going and you would rather have feedback on a more complete draft, then you can wait a little longer. We do advise you to sign up for, if you want a consultation, to sign up early so that you're sure to have enough time to get the information that you need. Also, if anybody is ever wants to have conversations, speculative conversations, like we don't know if we're going to apply for a grant about this, we often do those kinds of consultations. It's just very hard to do it when we're in the middle of a grant round. So hit us in the interim period. January is a great time for us. So is the summer.
Yeah, yeah. If you have like an idea where you're sort of not really sure about it at this point and you're not applying, then I would definitely reach out to me in July or August to do that. But right now, I'm mainly focusing on people who have active applications now at this point. All right. Do we have any further questions? Still have a lot of information to get through, so.
No questions right now, James. Thanks.
Okay, so we're going to talk about in the next one sort of assigning value. Really, that's kind of when you're thinking about how to like go from your idea to the kind of components. So, you know, if you have this sort of high level overview, what are the sort of steps or pieces that you need to accomplish that? And then so for assigning value, good sort of rules of thumb, I think, are really look to the market value of goods and services to sort of base your estimates on. So we realize that, you know, our request is really sort of, there isn't a degree of estimation in there, but try to use sort of realistic and sort of generally acceptable standards. If you request $1,000 for a piece of paper, I mean, that's kind of an extreme example, but you know, just trying to get a good sense of, you know, okay, this is generally what this costs. And you can use that for your estimates for matching funds as well. If you're saying, you know, for the match, saying whether it's cash you're using, you know, that's a little bit more clear, saying, okay, we're going to spend X amount of money on this. We're just not going to use the grant. We're going to use you know, our organization funds. But when you're thinking about in kind, which is the value of donated goods and services, think about if we had to pay for this, how much would it cost? For example, and that can sometimes be even like an example. Let's say you work at a public library and you need space for that. You can say, okay, if we were, you know, if we're gonna the library, or say the library is donating space for our program, where we don't need to pay for it, but if we had to pay for this much space, how much would it cost? There is a value to that as well, saying, okay, if we had to pay for this space, maybe, you know, it would cost us for this size room for this amount of time, it would cost us $50, $100, $250. So just kind of use that as a kind of guideline for thinking through the costs. Don't underestimate volunteer time. We see this a lot. So Gigi, if you could put the link into independent sector. We recommend that if you can also just search on Google for independent sector volunteer time. It'll take you to a website that calculates the value of volunteer time, both nationally and within individual states. The value for general volunteer time in New Jersey is $30 an hour. So you can use that. It's like a little bit less, but around $30 an hour. So we see a lot of people drastically sort of in the quantity of volunteer time, but also how much they're using that time, the calculation. And two, if you're using specialized services for volunteer time, something that might have a higher rate, you can use that as well. So it starts at around $29, $30 for general volunteer time, and it can go higher if you're using volunteers who have specialized skills. And you can kind of, you know, maybe they do that professionally and say, okay, if you were to be paid for this, how much would you be compensated for it? And that's a kind of general rule of thumb that you can use. Now, also say, you know, do your best to provide realistic estimates. So just kind of think through. We realize that this is an estimate. but just kind of think through and say, okay, what do we reasonably and realistically need to accomplish our goals within this? So we can kind of begin that section. You know, probably will be difficult to kind of work through. We don't have enough time to work through the full budget in say about 10 minutes. But really thinking about, you know, if you started with the component pieces, thinking about, you know, what, you know, reviewing those, thinking about, you know, what kind of, how much, you know, that would cost, kind of thinking about how to categorize them. We sort of have 4 high-level categories: personnel expenses, travel and lodging, supplies and services, and indirect costs. And then I think probably skipping step 3 because it might be difficult to do that within the time, but maybe thinking about, if you get to it, thinking about step 4 is determine whether these expenses are part of your request or your match. So just kind of thinking about, okay, like, what do we want to use for the match? What do we want to use for the quest? You know, do we need money to pay for resources and we're going to use volunteer time for our match? Or do we have, do we want to, you know, compensate our volunteers? So those are all kind of considerations that you can kind of make through this process. So Gigi, can you assign us to all rooms for the next 10 minutes?
Absolutely. I also want to just really quickly address the couple of questions that have come up.
Sure thing.
Yeah, scholar question. If you need, this question specifically says if you need an oral historian, but there's one on staff to do it, do you still need an outside scholar? You need a scholar. We use scholar broadly to mean either scholar or expert, scholar like PhD scholar or expert. And that person could be from your staff or from outside. It doesn't particularly matter. You do need at least one. And I wanted to also bring up to others, Beth had some trouble signing up for her consultation. She tried to book it and it looks like there's a little problem. It's called a temporary configuration problem. Don't know what's going on with that, but if you have a moment, we will look at it after we're done this webinar. So apologies. And yes, you can schedule your consultation for a little further out. You don't have to schedule it like for tomorrow. Okay.
Yeah, actually, there's a 2-day block. There's a 2-day. You need. There's a 2-day sort of window in advance, so you can only schedule something. Has to be at least 2 days.
You actually can't schedule it for tomorrow. My
Yeah,
apologies.
you can't. Yeah, you actually can't schedule it for tomorrow. Yeah, let me know, because if you have trouble, I know one person has had trouble, but I have received you know, a few successful sort of meeting requests.
Hopefully, yes. Hopefully this is a temporary glitch and we'll be able to fix this as well. And a few more questions about scholars. A scholar does not have to be an academic. They may have an academic degree or not. Community-based experts are considered scholars as well. And if you have questions about this particular to your program, this is a good thing to discuss with us in your consultation or to send a question, like send a specific question via email. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm going to send everybody in. I put a link again in the chat to the budget worksheet. So if you have not opened that already, now is your moment. And I'm going to send you back into your breakout rooms. I'm actually going to send you back into the same rooms. So you'll be working with the same folks again. Okay. 10 minutes, guys, and I'll let you know when you're 1 minute out. Bye.
Hello? Okay. Hello there.
Yes. Hi. Did someone have a question? Hmm. Right. I'm going to jump into a room to see if they have some questions. Hello, James, if you can hear me. We've got people in breakout rooms right now, but they're about to close. So,
Okay, then I'll just wait here with you.
yeah, no problem. I'm just about to close them anyway.
I
So,
had a quick question for you regarding humanities
Sure.
scholars.
yeah,
Can the humanities scholar be me, or do I need to get someone as a third party?
it does not have to be a third party. If you have the requisite skills that you require as the humanities scholar, it can come from inside your institution or outside. A lot of people do need outside scholars, but not all.
Okay, no problem. I'll take that under advisement. Thank you.
Sure, of course. Welcome back, everybody, as you're coming back. I'm seeing so many faces. I'm seeing lots of new faces, but also so many familiar faces, and it's so nice to see your faces. New and familiar. All right, I think we are officially closed out of our breakout rooms now. Everybody doing okay? Everybody still breathing? Good. No, it's a disaster. Oh no.
Oh, there's Karen.
We'll get you off the ledge. Don't worry. Promise. Okay. James, have you unmuted yourself?
I need to
Great.
unmute my, well, when it kicks me out of that, when it takes me out of the breakout room, it automatically mutes me. So then I'm not prepared for that, I guess. So before we begin to the next part, does anyone have any sort of questions, observations that they'd like to sort of discuss before we move on to this sort of closing out this presentation?
I do. Queen Noor does.
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain indirect costs a little more deeply, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So indirect costs would be overhead. So it's not sort of direct project expenses, but sort of, we recognize that you need to sort of keep the lights on. You have other organization expenses that aren't directly connected to the project. So you can put a portion of that within the grant. So it doesn't all necessarily be direct program costs. You couldn't, if, let's say you need to, yeah, I mean, you can even just put a percentage of there in it. I mean, it really depends. And there's a lot of kind of factors on it, but sort of generally it's overhead, not sort of direct program costs, but like you could just say indirect costs, it could be admin expenses. You have a bookkeeper that you need to hire. They're not doing work on the program, but you need them to sort of pay the bills to make sure that the scholars are being paid, things like that. You might need to buy insurance or something, for like event insurance, that would be an indirect cost. So things of that nature. But it's something we can discuss in more detail during the grant consultation, for sure, if you have like kind of more specific questions about it. Do you have anything you'd like to add about indirect costs, Gigi?
No, I think you covered it well. There was also a question here about volunteer hours. So it says, if you don't need volunteer hours to make the match, is it worth enumerating the contribution? So specifically, if you don't have volunteer hours coming into it, you shouldn't put it in your budget. But anything that is contributing to your overall project budget, you should, whether it is on the grant request side or the match side, you should put it into your budget. Because as James so rightly pointed out, one of the first things that our evaluators, when they're looking at grant proposals and making decisions about grant proposals, one of the first things they look at is your budget. And they want to be able to understand where your funding is going. And it really helps to illuminate your project plan and whether you've thought this through really well and have well allocated expenses.
Absolutely.
I have one
Yes.
other question, or maybe I could wait till consultation. I was just wondering if you really want to get the buy-in of people that you might be, you going out to do the research, like the one that where they just ask the question, you know, about is it worth it to the neighborhood? So that means you got to investigate with the neighborhood before you make a decision as to exactly what it is. But yet it's an action grant, and part of the action is to get the community involved in the decision making about what your project will look like. And so therefore you don't have exact figures for everything because their voices haven't been heard yet. Do you just do an estimate, or what do you do with that?
That's a good question. So, I mean, ultimately all grant proposals, it's an estimate. You mean we're just looking for people to make sort of well-informed, good faith estimates, but you know, it's a plan. A budget is a plan. Plans change under the best of circumstances. We're not under the best of circumstances right now. So we've seen a lot of plans change, particularly over the last year, where organizations have radically shifted. It's just really a question of, you know, looking at seeing like, has the organization kind of done enough due diligence where they have a general idea of what the expenses will, like a good solid grasp of what the expenses will be, and then, you know, with the sort of realization that like it almost always changes from the beginning to the end. Rarely what an organization says they're going to spend, you know, a lot of times they're close, but you know, then it's not always exact, because they say, okay, well, X person spent this, X person needed more time, Y person needed less time, this person stayed the same, you know, this cost came up that we didn't anticipate, but then we spent less on this because XYZ happened. So it's always kind of an estimate. So really just looking for good faith informed estimates for the costs and kind of working from there. And that's what we really judge it on. Not saying that, Shed, this is not you can't predict the future. We're just looking for sort of, say good faith informed estimates. That's what I would say you should strive for in your budget.
The only thing I would add is another reason why you need a good budget plan, a good faith estimate, is because you can't ask for more money after you get your grant. So if it turns out you were $3,000 short, we can't make up the difference later. So it's a good reason to plan, but plans always can change.
Yep, absolutely. Any further questions?
Should we be allowing in our budgeting for sort of underfunding and any contingencies that might arise?
That's a difficult question to answer. I mean, it's all contextual. I mean, I think that's something we could discuss in more detail. I don't have like a short answer. I don't have like a sort of a short answer for that. But I mean, I guess say usually it's that the contingencies come later. That's less part of the plan, and that, you know, it's difficult to build contingencies into it because you don't know necessarily what those contingencies are. And if you're very certain that a contingency is happening, you should just put it in the budget to begin with, and then we can adjust later. So that's kind of my short answer for that. Gigi probably has a better, more informed answer.
No, I don't. Other than we don't have a specific amount. I know some grantors ask for or recommend a specific contingent, like a 5% contingency or similar. We don't have a specific amount that we require or request, or a minimum or anything like that. There is no guidance on that. Other than we would recommend that you build contingency into your budget. If you think there's a chance that this might be higher, estimate higher, and think about ways that you could spend out additional money if you had it. Mm-hmm. I don't recommend doubling your estimate, and we can help you on a one-to-one basis. Again, looking specifically when you do draft review or consultation. Yeah, don't overestimate, but also don't underestimate as well, because you see grantees sometimes getting in trouble for that as well, because they think, particularly our grants are competitive, and we have so, you know, sometimes to say, okay, well, I'll just request a lower amount thinking it will help them, and it usually doesn't, because there can also be instances where it's very clear an organization, just based on the budget, really doesn't understand the sort of complexity or the cost associated with it, because there's no way they're going to accomplish this work with $2,000.
It's just unrealistic. So that's, I think that's the other thing as well. All right, I would like, do we have any sort of pressing questions? Because I would.
I think you should continue, James. I'm answering a couple of specific budget questions in the chat as well, so also look there, everybody. Okay.
Great. All right, so I was planning to discuss this part in more detail. This is the questions you'll see in step 3. I think these are, maybe you've started your narrative, but if you're kind of like starting from the sort of, you have the description, you kind of worked out the budget. These are the kind of important questions to address, I think, before you write your narrative. These are not specific questions that are in our proposal, but if you can answer all these questions, you don't necessarily need to write like, you know, a full page response, but even if you have, you know, fragments, bullet, you know, a sort of bulleted list of sort of these questions, if you can answer these questions, you'll be in a good position to write the narrative itself. And we kind of use these questions versus our questions because these will be more broadly sort of applicable to other funding opportunities. So really, who's the project for? So we're looking at audience. How are they involved? You know, as the saying is, nothing about us without us. So we're really saying, you know, if you're working with the audience, how do you know this is the best way to serve their needs and interests? Have you discussed them? You know, do you have members of this audience or this group in your project team? Are they members of focus groups? Do you have an advisory committee? So it's really important to think about how can you get the audience or audiences that you want to serve involved in the work itself. The most competitive proposals have a high degree of audience involvement. I think a dangerous assumption to make is that you understand, you know, that if particularly if you don't have a lot of experience with a group or an audience, is saying, okay, well, this is what they'd be interested in, because maybe it's close, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, maybe it's close, but without actually having their involvement, you're not going to know that specifically. Looking at the problem or need that is being addressed. So what kind of problem are you looking to solve? Maybe it's that, you know, you're saying, okay, we wanted to work with this particular audience, but we don't really have any connections to that community. So that could be part of the grant as well. Looking at your organization, why does your organization want to do this?
Move in your stomach. If this is hurting you, you getting up. Okay, so why are you saying ouch, Tiff?
Just a reminder, everyone, please mute yourself if you're not. Let's see. Looking at what you'll have at the end. So what's the end product and what does success look like? So that's getting into the question of evaluation. So, you know, what you might have this, but how do you sort of say that you've successfully met the goals of your project? You know, if you wanted to work with a particular audience, were you successful in sort of gaining their trust, gaining their interest? So that's just kind of general questions. Okay, so probably a really important thing for us to go over is looking at why proposals are not funded. So we are okay, actually skip forward. Lacks significant humanities focus. So we are a public humanities organization. So humanities need to be central to our project. Now, humanities, we like to say, are disciplines and practices that explore human histories, cultures, and values and beliefs through practices such as critical thinking, textual analysis, dialogue. So we're really looking for humanities at the heart. We do not fund, if a project, a lot of times we see this in sort of projects at the intersection of the arts and the humanities, where there's not really a clear humanities questions. Really, humanities is about, it's a social practice. It's not about personal expression. And it's really about sort of interpretation and analysis sort of versus, sort of personal expression. So really important that projects, for a project to be competitive, humanities need to be at the center of the project. Projects that do not have a public focus it's another reason why we do not fund projects. So we we often see this. We see this in lots of proposals, but you know, if it's not really clear what the public benefit is, if it seems more of a sort of an individual research project, this kind of often comes to play with university projects where the project doesn't really have a focus beyond, you know, sort of students and faculty, which are, you know, generally have more opportunities for humanities engagement. So we're really looking for projects that have a broad public focus, does not involve the audience or does not match our audience priorities. So we're looking for projects that have a deep involvement of the audience, but we're also looking to expand the humanities to underserved audiences, which is not, say, we have something about that in our grants FAQ. There's not sort of an overall definition of it, because it can be contextual, but we often see it as youth, people of color, LGBTQ populations, people in rural areas who might not have that sort of access to sort of the sort of large marquee institutions that you might have in sort of a larger center like Newark, you know, people with disabilities who might have trouble, you know, attending sort of in-purpose programming, or have sort of sensory, you know, or cognitive disabilities that make it sort of, you know, difficult for them to participate in sort of traditional programming. So there's not sort of one audience. There's many different sort of underserved audiences, and that's going to be sort of based on the context that you work in. And that's something we could discuss too during the grants consultation. Big thing, we talked about this earlier. This is a big thing. Narrative and budget don't match. So we see this many different examples, but it should be clear from the budget, and like if something's mentioned in the narrative, it should be reflected in the budget. I can kind of give an extreme example of, you know, we had an organization, they wanted to do a series of walking tours. It was actually a really well-written narrative, but we get to the budget, 40% of the budget's for buses. They don't mention buses once in the application. And so that proposal was not funded because we're not really sure why, you know, they need these buses. It could also play into an example for an arts-based, you know, if it's an arts-based organization, they talk a lot about the humanities in the project, but all the expenses are for art supplies. That's not really going to be sort of a competitive proposal either. So we're really looking for, you know, a match between the narrative and the budget. You know, I like to think that, you know, should be able to a large degree understand what you want to do by looking at the short description and the budget, and really that the narrative brings context and further information to the work that you're doing. So it kind of provides the sort of context, deeper information, but really the core of it, looking at it, is the budget and the kind of, you know, the shorter kind of, we should be able to have a general idea of what you want to do from that. A lack of clarity on what the project will do. And this is particularly important with action grants, because we're really looking, you know, for that, that's an implementation grant. We're looking for a clear sort of project, a clear timeline, clear deliverables. And this kind of comes up into many different capacities. I think one I see a lot is people talking about the big picture. They say, oh, this is what our organization wants to do, or they're talking about a 5-year project, or really they're applying for a 1-year grant. So really thinking about, what do you specifically want to do with this funds within the time period that you have, and really focusing on that and not focusing on the big picture. And what we also like to call, the last is what Gigi and I call the passion problem, where you are really interested in this topic. It's really important to you, but you're not, sometimes we see this, it's really important to somebody, but they don't really talk about the sort of broader sort of relevance or resonance to their audience. So they focus on a lot about why it's important to them, and not necessarily why it'd be important to sort of, why it's important to them and their organization, and not really why it would be important to sort of broader audiences that they serve. And kind of give a little bit of a lack of perspective, I think. Now, I'd like everyone to guess in the chat. What's the #1 reason proposals are not funded? Everyone put your responses in the chat.
missed the deadline, it will definitely not be funded. If you miss the deadline, it's true. Incomplete application, true, also true. Lacking humanities component, yes, but I think it is actually Ken Pokrawski who nailed it first. Lack of money. We run out of money.
We run out of funding. That's the number one reason. So all those things are good. I mean, they're not good per se, but they're sort of good responses.
They're accurate.
They're accurate. But the number one reason is we run out of money. So to give perspective, we have almost $850,000 in requests based on estimates provided in the LOIs, and we have about $200,000 of funds to award in this round. So we will not be able to fund all these grants. There are plenty of good proposals that would be funded if we had more money. It happens all the time where essentially my feedback was, this is good, but you just missed the cutoff. Maybe there's something very minor that would have not really been a sort of a major issue if we had more money. And there's definitely been circumstances like that where it's like, honestly, if we had like another $100,000, this would have been funded. But the reason you weren't funded is just for something kind of a little bit more of a minor thing versus a sort of big structural flaws. And then we definitely do receive some applications where there's a sort of big structural problem, sort of overarching problem. But a lot of it is just, it was good, but we don't have enough money to fund it. These are competitive grants. We're fairly limited in our resources. I mean, not as much as many organizations, but we can only really fund around $400,000 of grants per year. We have 2 rounds, so we have $850,000 in requests in this round and $200,000 in funding to award. So it's going to be a very competitive round, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to do this workshop, is to kind of help you, give you some tools to kind of think through your proposal. We recognize, as I said before, that there are some experienced grant writers here, but there's some people who might have, moderate experience, and some people, this might be your first proposal. So we're really trying, through the workshops and the consultations, helping provide resources that there's a little bit more equity, so that we're not just funding organizations that have, full-time development staff. So with that, I'm going to move into some other considerations that I think are important.
Hey, James.
And yes.
Sorry, before you run, could you talk a little bit about when we award partial funds and when we don't?
Yes, that's a great question. So I guess in the past, we were a little bit more reluctant to award partial funding because, if you request a certain amount of money, we sort of take it on value that we need it. However, we have been awarding some partial funding lately just so we can award more grants. Usually we try to keep it around 90%. So, usually if we'll say, okay, we might give you a 90% award, because we feel that that's going to have less of an impact on the project than say like awarding like a 50% award. So we do keep partial funding under consideration as an option when we have a sort of busy pool, though. We don't want to do too much of a reduction because, as I said, we take it on face value that you've put your sort of good faith estimate in, and that you need that money. Sometimes we'll remove costs that are ineligible or just don't seem sort of necessary, like to the project. It's like, this is good otherwise, but this expense isn't eligible. So we don't want to just decline it for that because everything else is good. So maybe we'll just remove that one expense, or maybe there's something discrete in there. So it's all contextual, but generally we don't like to do like extreme partial funding. We try to minimize it. And we've only been really doing it more lately is because we just have such a high volume of requests versus the amount of funding that we can give. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that, Gigi?
Nope.
Okay. All right, so these are some other considerations. So I would say generally avoid superlatives. So what do I mean by that? First, best, unique, only. Rarely true, and maybe it's the first or the new because it's not a good idea, or maybe someone has done this before because maybe it's a terrible idea. So generally I would say that like saying this is the first, unique, only, best, not a good practice, and oftentimes it's really not true. it might be new to you, but there might be like multiple other examples. And we're not necessarily asking for anyone to reinvent the wheel. You know, maybe it's a new approach to you, but it's not a new approach to somebody else. And that's also a great opportunity to say, okay, well, maybe we can learn from learn from their work that they've done, and looking at their success and failures to kind of work on that. I also say depth is better than breadth. And what do I mean by that? And I think this is really important for organizations that are applying for the first time. Sometimes we get these projects that are what I would almost call potpourri projects, where they say we want to do a little bit of this and we want to do a little bit of that. We want to design an exhibit, we want to have a lecture series, we want to build an exhibit. So all these different things. But it's really good to concentrate on saying, okay, particularly if it's your first time applying for a grant, or you're new to this process, you're a smaller organization, saying, okay, like what could we do really well? Maybe what's the one thing that we're most committed to and has the most overlap with the New Jersey Council for the Humanities goals as an organization, and saying, okay, maybe we just focus on that one component and focus on doing that component really well, versus saying we want to do these 5 or these 7 things with that, particularly if you don't have experience, sort of running complex multi-part projects, and if you're sort of a newer quantity to the council. So I definitely recommend focusing on depth, trying to do one or two things really well versus trying to do 5 or 7 things. Another thing too is, because this might be gone is not enough. We sometimes get this for historic preservation projects, saying, well, this history will be gone, and a lot of history disappears. And I think it's important when you're saying that is need to communicate the significance and value, the sort of larger significance and value historically, but also to your audience and your organization. So if this history is going to be gone, why is that important? So making a case for that, not just saying because it's gone is not enough in itself. So it's something also you see kind of applicants do as well, say, oh, this history will be gone. And that's really the rationale, and not really going deeper than that, and saying, well, okay, if this is going to disappear, why is that important? Why is that important to our organization? Why is that important to our audience? And why is that more important generally? Oh, skipped ahead. Okay, some important dates. So the final application deadline, if you're applying in this round, is April 15th, 2021 at 11:59 p.m. We typically don't accept late proposals unless there's extenuating circumstances. And if there are, please let us know in advance as much as possible. If there's major sicknesses, illnesses, family emergencies, we can make exceptions for that, but definitely contact us. Don't contact us, a week later, but try to, get in touch with us as soon as possible. We understand that you'll have different priorities, but definitely let us know, if you have obstacles that come along. But generally, because I forgot is not a good answer. So April 15th, 11:59 p.m. is the final deadline. If you have not submitted an LOI in this round, you're not eligible to submit a full application. So the LOI was due on the 15th. It is required. So if you haven't applied in this round, you should be looking at September when we're going to be sort of opening the next round. We don't have dates for that yet, but we should have that in August. But it's going to be very similar to what we had in the previous round, where we have, the LOI deadline in September, final application deadline in October, and we'll be making our award decisions by October. But in this round, deadline's 15th of April at 11:59 p.m. and we'll be notifying people of the awards by June 25th, 2021. So whether you've been awarded or declined, we'll just be notifying everyone by June 25th by email. So if you don't hear anything from us by then, definitely reach out to us. Sometimes, emails get lost in spam filters, junk mail, or just sort of generally in the hustle and bustle of life. So if you don't have it, definitely let us know. But that is when we'll be making our decisions. So if you message us on, May 1st, we won't be ready. We'll be ready by June 25th. We'll let you know by then. And sort of the last piece is, here's my contact information. I am the primary contact on grants. My name, as you probably know already, is James Kirkland. The best way to get in contact with me is email. I'm happy to talk to people on the phone, but I think it's generally easier to say, contact me and we'll schedule a time to talk over email. If you want to call me, particularly if there's sort of a last minute thing, you can call me at 609-695-4303. Sometimes my phone reception is very spotty in my house. So it's not the greatest way to always get in contact with me. So I definitely recommend, even if you want to call, just reach out to me by email, make an appointment. If you want to have a sort of formal conversation about your project, schedule a grant consultation. So if you have like a lot of in-depth questions, just say, okay, if you can't find the link, let me know and I'll send it to you. And that's kind of it.
Questions that came up in the chat that I'd like to quickly go over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. One is that I don't know the answer to the question, so only you can answer it, which is, if you've already scheduled your consultation, how do you change the date? Do you know? Or is it best to just email you?
Yeah, you should have received a new, so if you should have received an email notification when it was scheduled. You can reschedule it through there. However, if you're unsure, just contact me. You can just cancel it and we can move it to a different time.
Cancel and move to a different time. And the other question that came up was, if you receive an award, how quickly does your project have to start? And the answer is within 3 months of award.
Yes, that's a great
you'll know
question.
by June 25th, start by the end of September.
Yep, that's a great question. Yeah, so yeah, all projects must start within 3 months of the award. So you can't apply, if you want to start something later than that, just apply in the next round. That would be a sort of better timeline. So yeah, we want projects to start by September.
I think
at the latest.
I have gotten a couple of direct messages about funding that's coming through the national and that might come through the CARES Act, or I'm sorry, not the CARES Act. Ooh, it's like it's last spring. No, the American Rescue Plan.
Mm-hmm.
This is the big funding package that came through Congress. We are getting funding through that. The National Endowment for the Arts is getting, the National Endowment for the Humanities, woo, and the National Endowment for the Arts are both getting funding, but we will receive part of the NEH funding. We have no information beyond that yet, but please stay tuned. This will be separate from our regular grants program, but your organization may be eligible for some emergency funding through that funding. Like I said, no details yet, but we will announce it as soon as we know.
Yeah, you almost know as much about it as we do at this point, to be honest. We just know that money's coming, but we don't know the timeline or anything.
I think at this point, we're pretty much done. If anybody has any last questions, we can hang out a little bit, but
yeah, happy to stick around.
James, did you have any last parting words? Bye, Ridgely.
No, I don't have any last minute questions, I guess, or last minute thoughts, but I definitely would recommend, if you have the opportunity, if you would like to discuss your project in more detail, is to sign up for a grant consultation. And we can kind of go over the specifics of it. We can also discuss draft as well. So in the notification email, there's instructions for signing up for the consultation, and just ask for drafts 2 days in advance of the consultation. So I don't need it a week in advance, but and if you have questions about submitting the draft, there's a couple ways that you can do it. We don't require full drafts either. It could be a partial draft. As I said, we look at drafty drafts as well. So if you need, if you need some time to kind of, if you just need to say, okay, we've gotten this much so far, and this is the main thing that we want sort of guidance on, that's fine. Usually having a budget and a narrative is good. And actually, I would say, even if you don't have the full narrative, having bullet points in a budget is actually better than just having a narrative, in my opinion.
There's a question that just came up in the chat about having a large asset balance on your 990 work against you. Does having a large asset balance on your 990 work against you? And the answer is no, not necessarily. It also doesn't necessarily work for you. your 990 or your audited financial statement, or your lack thereof, frankly, if you are a small volunteer-driven organization, are all one factor that is taken into consideration when we're evaluating your grant proposal. It is, if there is something on your financial statements that you think would be a concern, I would strongly advise you to address it directly in your organization. For example, we have received proposals from, this comes up a lot with universities, right? A university has a large endowment, but this particular institute, museum, whatever department has no access to that large endowment. So the large endowment makes it look like, does this organization really have need? Well, yes, they do. But it's helpful. We won't necessarily know that unless you address it directly. So this is something to talk about with James in your grant consultation if you have direct concerns about it. But generally speaking, we fund to the smallest nonprofits in New Jersey and some of the largest as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Any other last questions?
Yeah, I mean, this was scheduled at 3:30, so definitely feel free to ask questions. I mean, oh, was it? Oh, wait, it was scheduled at 3, so we're overtime actually. Oh, never mind. Oops.
We're 10 minutes over.
You
All
guys,
right, well,
you guys did a great job. I really have to say, it's, I have a lot of grant writing experience through different nonprofits, and not only is the information informative, you're so nice and you're so kind and you do such a good job of explaining. And I think writing grants is so intimidating for organizations, even if you have a lot of experience. So I just have to say, it's really a pleasure. And I'm really grateful for the time you gave us. It's really great.
yeah, that's thank you for that. I mean, I think I definitely agree. I mean, I've been more on the sort of granting side than the grant writing side, so I haven't really. But I mean, I can imagine it would be intimidating for me. So we're just hoping to kind of give people kind of a step-by-step process for thinking through the sort of germ of the idea, sort of like making an outline. If you're writing a paper in college, or you're not gonna start like. Hopefully, you would at least start with an outline. I mean, I definitely have written some that didn't, but the best ones have always been written with an outline in mind.
That they weren't your highest grades, right, James? Yeah, thank you, Jill. That's great to hear. One of the reasons that the state humanities councils exist is to take this federal funding and get it down to a much more grassroots local level. I have been there. I come from the museum world prior to being at the council, and filling out a full NEH application is an endeavor. If ours takes you that long, you are definitely putting in way too much information. Don't do it. Yeah, Queen, I see you shaking your head. You know.
He knows, yeah.
Our goal is to make this as easy as possible. There are certain things we do have to ask you for, but we do want to make it as easy as possible for you. If you have trouble, please reach out. Please do. Okay. I think we're done, unless any last things come in through. Yay!
Actually, you know what? This is a request by if people are willing to do this, we'd ask for a group photo.
Oh, right.
Right. So no pressure to stick around, but if you'd like to say be around for a group photo, I'd say on 3, everyone say humanities, and then all right. So 1, 2, 3, humanities. Hopefully that worked. Now Angela will be happy. All right, everybody. I'll let you go.
Take care. Thank you.
And I'm sure I'll be talking to many of you over the next few weeks. So definitely reach out if you have any difficulties signing up for a consultation, and we can put something on the calendar.
Great. Have a great day, everybody. See you later.